introduce you all to Dr. Olisa Mak. She is a naturopathic physician. She specializes in mental health, digestive health, and hormonal health. So I'm super excited to have this evening. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. If someone can just let me know if you can see my screen. I'm new to this, so bear with me.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
so I just want to introduce myself. I'm a naturopathic doctor in downtown Vancouver, and I used to be a high school teacher. And so with that background, I am very, very passionate about education. And with every visit that I have with my patients, I aim to provide them with one or two things that they can implement in their lifestyle. And so that's where I'm coming from. And in my life, going through medical school, I've experienced a lot of stress, and that comes with a lot of other issues as well. And so I'm really passionate about hormone imbalances. So I thank everyone for joining me. It's such a beautiful day. We have a lot of information to go through, and I hope that by the end of my talk, you understand the thyroid better and even get a few answers, whether for a loved one or yourself. So let me share.
Dr. Mak, can I just say something really quickly?
Yeah, of course,
can you please pin your video? Can you please pin your video for everybody?
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did. Okay, sorry. It's not coming up for me. Okay.
And actually, your name comes up as Hannah Rakowska, Dr.
Yes. It does. But can everyone see me on the forefront?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I can now, yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So we're talking about unhappy thyroid and why one pill is not enough. So by the end of the talk, I really hope that I have accomplished answering this question. The thyroid gland really affects every single cell of the body, and yet we understand so little about it. And for many people, this means that they struggle with weight gain, hair loss, low energy, stubbornly high cholesterol levels, and yet they're told that there's nothing wrong. Blood work is all normal. And even when blood tests do come back with ranges that are, numbers that are out of range, then the approach is just usually to give one pill, and symptoms are magically expected to resolve with this one pill. And in this talk, when I was putting together this talk, I really wanted to think about what is the information that I want to share and how is the thyroid commonly misunderstood. And so we're going to talk about just how complex the thyroid is, what is needed for a healthy thyroid, and to shine a light on what might be your next step to improve your thyroid health. All right. So we have to remember that your thyroid gland is a part of the endocrine system, so all of your hormones. So your brain, your pineal gland, which affects your sleep, it produces melatonin. We have your adrenal glands, which is your stress, helps produce cortisol, your stress hormone. Your pancreas, which produces insulin levels, it helps control weight, appetite, all of these things, and of course, reproductive health. So when there's a thyroid issue, there is always going to be an issue somewhere else in this system. And it's really important to do some investigative work to figure out what is the imbalance, where is the underlying issue. So here's the agenda of what we'll be talking about. I'm going to be covering how the thyroid works, TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, types of thyroid dysfunction, what should be tested in order to see the big picture, what you need for a healthy thyroid, energy production, various nutrients, clean cells, low stress, as well as various forms of medication. And then at the end, what are the key questions that you need to ask when evaluating your own thyroid health? there is so much information about the thyroid, and really in an hour, we're just skimming the surface of it. So I welcome questions at the end, just so I can get through all the material. And as Hannah said, just put them in the chat box. All right. So how does the thyroid work? Thyroid stimulation really begins from the brain, in one part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and it produces a hormone called TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone. And this hormone goes to another part of the brain called the anterior pituitary. And the anterior pituitary produces TSH, which many of you might recognize because this is what you'll usually see on your test results. TSH then goes to your thyroid and stimulates production of two different hormones, T3 and T4. T4, we're going to start with T3. T3 is the stronger one, and because it's the stronger one, your thyroid gland makes less of it. It's the active form. So T3 is the only form of thyroid hormone that can actually go into a cell and bind to DNA and affect metabolism. And this is a very, very important thing to remember. And T3 is predominantly made from T4. So T4 makes T3. The majority of T3 comes from T4. And this process happens in the liver, the kidney as well, and the rest of all over the body, really. And then T4 is the weaker form. It's the backup or storage form, and it's made predominantly in the thyroid. So 97% of all your thyroid hormone is T4, and only 3% is T3. And then again, T3 goes to all cells to affect metabolism. There's also a third type of hormone called reverse T3, and I'll go into this in more detail later, but want you to familiarize yourself with this diagram. We'll come back to it several times in the next hour. So we have three hormones, T3, T4, and reverse T3. All right, Right. So conversion again is a process where T4 is converted into T3, and this mainly happens in the liver and kidneys and everywhere in the body, but to a lesser extent. All right. So I wanted to reinforce the idea that your thyroid health goes much farther than just your thyroid gland, which is inside your neck by the throat. So when we're talking about thyroid health, we're not just talking about the gland. We need to consider your liver and your kidneys, and we'll go into that in more detail as well. All right. So I really like this metaphor for thyroid health. If we go back to this diagram, we see a chain of command. So one hormone stimulates a gland, and then another hormone stimulates the thyroid gland, and so on. So in understanding the thyroid, it's really like you have a jockey who's trying to make his horse go faster or slower using a whip. So the jockey is your pituitary, that part of the brain, and the whip is TSH, and your horse is your thyroid. So how hard is your jockey trying to get the horse to move? If your horse is going too slow, is your jockey working harder to make your horse go faster? So I do like this kind of metaphor to describe thyroid function. And so, all right, so in conventional medicine, when you go see your family doctor about health concerns like low energy or weight gain or even weight loss, they typically just test TSH first. If TSH is normal, then all other testing is automatically canceled and your thyroid is fine. But why is this problematic? So why not just test TSH? The problem is that by just testing TSH, we don't know if the thyroid is responding properly to the signal that's coming from the brain. We don't know if the brain's signal is appropriate to the levels of thyroid hormones in the body. So as I mentioned as an example, if you're experiencing slower metabolism, like low energy or weight gain, that means that your horse is going slower, and to compensate, your jockey should be working harder to make your horse go faster. And so with TSH, we really don't know if this is happening. And really, TSH is only out of range after the thyroid has been under significant stress for a long time. And usually by this point, it's quite difficult to, not difficult, but it takes quite a bit longer to reverse the damage that's occurred. So if we take a more comprehensive approach by testing T4, T3, and TSH, then we can see the bigger picture. T4 is great at telling us what your nutritional levels are like. So iodine, T3 is great for telling us what's happening to your thyroid hormones in the rest of the body. All right. Can someone just tell me if I'm speaking really fast?
Good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. So types of thyroid issues. There are so many different types of thyroid issues, but I really just want to distinguish between hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. Let's start with hypothyroidism. In hypothyroidism, ultimately, you see signs that your hormones are not getting into your cells. Remember, T3 goes to all your cells to affect metabolism. In hypothyroidism, you're seeing signs that this is not happening. And so if your T3 is low, remember T3 is your active form. If T3 is low, then your horse is going slow, and your jockey and should be using the whip a little bit harder, so your TSH should go up. So often that's a very confusing idea because we see TSH go up and yet it's hypothyroidism. And if T3 is high, then the brain wants to decrease signaling to the thyroid to tell it to slow down. So that's why TSH goes down. That's hyperthyroidism. In this talk, I am mostly going to talk about hypothyroidism because this is really the most common form of thyroid dysfunction that I see, and it's the most commonly misunderstood or undiagnosed form of thyroid dysfunction. All right, so what are the symptoms of hypothyroidism? We have weight gain, hair loss, fatigue, low energy, dry skin, constipation, cold intolerance, high cholesterol. That's one that most people don't really know about. Brain fog, poor memory, gas, bloating, heartburn. All of these are signs of hypothyroidism. And these symptoms, again, ultimately occur because thyroid hormones are not getting into cells. Once we know that, then we have to ask, is it a true thyroid deficiency where the thyroid gland isn't making enough thyroid hormone, or is the thyroid gland actually making enough hormones and it's just not getting into the cells? So that's a very important question to answer. And okay, so we are back to this diagram. Like I promised, we are going to see this many, many times. All right, where am I? All right, so I mentioned that there are many different types of hypothyroidism, and that's because there can be a break in messaging. So it could be the hypothalamus is not producing TRH, or it's the pituitary that's not producing TSH, or it could be an issue where the thyroid just isn't receiving the messages from the brain. So it can be at any of these levels. All right. And then again, conversion, I want to reinforce this again, is T4 to T3, and it occurs in the liver and kidneys. All right, hyperthyroidism. Symptoms here: heart palpitations, unexplained weight loss that are not from lifestyle changes like more exercise or dieting. We have brittle hair, shaky hands, insomnia, increased sweating, as well as anxiety. And in hyperthyroidism, there aren't as many causes, and it's a little bit more straightforward to diagnose. With hyperthyroidism, it can be a tumor in the brain, a tumor in the thyroid, or a autoimmune condition where the thyroid is being stimulated by antibodies, and these antibodies just constantly trigger thyroid production. So hyperthyroidism is a little bit more straightforward, and usually treatment is more symptom management. So what can we do for the heart palpitations? Often the thyroid is destroyed. All right, so again, I mentioned ultimately whether you see hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism depends on what's happening inside your cell. All right, so blood work. Thyroid blood work is very, very difficult to interpret because it's really, it doesn't always give us the whole picture because it is blood work. We don't know if hormones are actually getting into your cells. So to see if hormones are getting into cells, we need to look at your symptoms as well as body temperature and if there's a slow heart rate. All right, so what should be tested? The basic blood work, the bare minimum that I recommend and that I do on all my patients is TSH, T3, and T4. Once I get back this basic assessment, I look at it and see if there's something that doesn't make sense. So for example, if TSH is normal, but T3 and T4 are low normal, then that tells me that there's something wrong with the blood work. The T3 and T4 are low normal, so TH should be high or at least in the high normal range. So this is an example. If this is the blood work results that I see from TSH, T3, and T4, then this would prompt me to do more testing, more investigative work. So what do I want to look for? I want to look at ferritin, which is your stored iron levels, vitamin D, your thyroid antibodies, reverse T3, as well as fasting insulin or glucose. There are so many different tests that you could do as further investigative work when it comes to thyroid, but I would really say that these 5 additional tests are the most crucial ones and tell you the most. And I'll explain in later slides why each of these are important to test when it comes to evaluating the thyroid. So what do we need for a healthy thyroid? What is it, what can promote a healthy thyroid? The first thing is healthy energy production. Moving thyroid hormones into your cells where they can increase metabolism is not a passive process. It requires energy. And so this right here, it's a very complicated diagram. Don't worry about it. I just really want to show you what are the different nutrients that you need to produce that energy. So this is a picture of a process that occurs in your mitochondria, and your mitochondria are your power plants, and so they're found in all your cells, but most abundant in cells that require a lot of energy. So that would be in your heart, in your muscles, in your brain. These are the organs that require the most energy. And we have right here NADH, if bottom left corner right here. NADH, that is vitamin B3. That's a form of vitamin B3. We have FADH2, that is a form of vitamin B6 that you need for this process. In the middle, there's oxygen, O2, that you need, and it makes water. And then finally, you need hydrogen. So far, we know that it needs vitamins as well as oxygen. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail about this. This is another diagram that shows what is needed for energy production inside your cells. And we see fat and sugar intermediates. So you need fat, you need sugar to make energy. And then we see that it makes heat as well. So one product of energy production is heat. All right. So this is why iron deficiency alone can cause hypothyroidism. And for a lot of people, simply addressing really, really low iron levels can fix a thyroid issue. And so iron deficiency does not necessarily mean you're anemic. And one way that naturopathic doctors differ from conventional medical doctors is that our range of what is acceptable is much more narrow. So when you go do blood work for ferritin, which is your stored iron levels, if you're in the 20 range, family doctors won't necessarily flag that as being low. But as a naturopathic doctor, I really want to see your iron levels being at least 90. It should be above 90. And then abnormally high levels in the 200, 300 range are not good either. It can be an indication of inflammation. So how does iron deficiency lead to hypothyroidism? Because iron deficiency ultimately means that you have insufficient oxygen being carried by red blood cells. And if we look back at this diagram right here, we know that oxygen is needed by your mitochondria, your power plants, to make energy. So if this process doesn't go on, then you don't have energy to bring your T3, your active hormone, into your cells, and you don't have iodide absorption. And I'll talk about the iodide absorption. That's a new idea. So really, iron deficiency just stops energy production ultimately. The other thing is a good night's sleep, sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is basically when someone has interrupted breathing during their sleep. So they're not getting enough oxygen throughout the whole night. And so when you're sleeping, that's really when your body should be healing and regenerating things. And when you have sleep apnea, that's not possible. Your body can't restore things. And so again, that's going back to not having enough oxygen to make energy, and then you don't have enough energy to bring your thyroid hormones into your cells, and you don't have enough energy to make iodine. All right. So I mentioned that blood work has its limitations, and we have to look at blood work along with symptoms and different other investigative work. And so when it comes to thyroid issues, I often recommend basal body temperature. And this is a really simple thing that you can do even tomorrow, and that's taking your temperature 3 times a day for 3 days. It doesn't matter when you take it, when you take your temperature, as long as it's consistent over the 3 days. And we're basically looking if your temperatures are consistently low. Anything below 36, I would say, is low. And I have patients who have temperatures of 34.5 or 35.6, and the highest is 36.1. And this is ultimately an indication that thyroid hormones are not getting into these cells. All right. So I highly encourage you to do this at home and see what your temperatures are like. All right. So far we've talked about energy production as a requirement for good thyroid health. Next, I'm going to talk about a few nutrients that are needed for hormone production and healthy conversion. Healthy conversion, just make sure that you know what that means. That's the process where T4 is converted into T3. All right, iodine. So I saw a question in the chat where someone said that they had heard that iodine was good for thyroid health. So iodine is needed for T4 production. So when you have an iodine deficiency, that is a mistake. So when you have an iodine deficiency, then your T4, T3 ratio should be low. So my apologies. That should be low T4, T3 ratio, and then iodine excess should be high. Iodine is not recommended for everyone, and it's something that can really flare things up if it's not the right thing for you. So before you go buy iodine and start taking it, just make sure you consult with a healthcare provider who is trained in nutrition and supplementation. I will talk about iodine in a bit more detail. All right, so I mentioned here T4 and T3 ratio, so I want to briefly talk about that. When you have your blood work, so if TSH comes back out of range, then your family doctor will look at T3 and T4 ratios. And what does this information tell us? Ideally, you want your T4 to be about 3 times higher than your T3. Remember that T4 is the weaker thyroid hormone, therefore it's made in a larger quantity, it's a backup form, whereas T3 is your active form, it's stronger, so it's made in a smaller amount. So your T4 to T3 ratio should be 3 to 1. You don't want it much higher, you don't want it much lower. If you have, there can be a few things that can alter this ratio. It can be a selenium deficiency, where T4 becomes reverse T3, and I'll talk about reverse T3 in the next slide, but I believe, just gonna drink some water. All right, so T4 to T3 conversion requires selenium and zinc, and if you have a deficiency, that's not possible, and you have reverse T3, and so we evaluate that through the T4, T3 ratio. All right, okay, so as promised, what is reverse T3? Reverse T3 is not something that family doctors really ever test, and reverse T3 is produced when the body wants to conserve energy and does not want to increase metabolism. So when is that? It's when there are extreme calorie deficits, like in extreme exercise, extreme dieting, as well as chronic illness. All right, so reverse T3 is inactive, and yet it can bind to T3 receptor sites. So when T3 goes through your bloodstream, it will grab onto receptor sites on your cells, and then it will be transported into your cell. Reverse T3 can bind to those same spots on your cells and prevent T3 from binding. So if you have too much T3, it's definitely not a good thing. Abnormally elevated reverse T3, as mentioned, can be because of selenium deficiencies as well as chronically high cortisol. And cortisol is your stress hormone. And so really chronic stress is when you would also see reverse T3. All right. So I also saw some questions about what are some foods that you can eat to improve thyroid health. I put 2 asterisks next to Brazil nuts because this is one of the best things that you can be eating. It's great for selenium levels. So just a handful of them every single day. You don't want too much selenium either. Some of the other things that you want to eat are wild salmon, halibut, tuna, sardines, certain types of cheese, eggs. Have a good variety of seeds, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds. All of those things are great. Oops. Right. Okay. So next, so far we've talked about energy, various nutrients, and next, low stress. I've yet to do a talk where I don't need to talk about stress, and that's really because stress seems to wreak havoc on every single system and contribute to a lot of different conditions. All right, so stress is anything that your body needs to readjust itself to. And this can differ quite a bit from your current definition of a stress. When I ask patients, are you stressed out? Most people will tell me no. Stress does not necessarily have to mean a work deadline or a family conflict. It can be a missed meal. It can be a source of inflammation. So food sensitivities causing inflammation could be a source of stress. Calorie restriction, a fever, extreme exercise, a work deadline. Even a perceived or anticipated event is a stress. So our bodies aren't always great at differentiating between perceived, anticipated, or real stress. So if I ask you to imagine getting hit by a car, versus actually getting hit by a car, your body is actually going to have a similar hormonal response. And so that's why anxiety and anxiety can be a very real threat to your health and well-being, and something that needs to be addressed because our body treats it and responds in exactly the same way. All right. So in all of these situations, cortisol is released, and cortisol means that T4 is going to be changed into reverse T3 rather than T3 itself. So because of this, cortisol, any type of chronic stress, is going to decrease T3. So it's going to decrease this conversion, and we're going to have less T3 going to the cells to affect metabolism. Right. Calorie restriction. All right. So in calorie restriction, anytime, actually, let me backtrack. I want to say that low calorie or carbohydrate restrictive diets can permanently damage the thyroid and be very difficult to reverse, even when the diet was 10 years ago. And we're going to talk about why, but this is one of the trickiest situations and trickiest thyroid conditions to treat, is when someone has tried a low calorie or low carbohydrate diet. And so during a calorie restrictive diet, energy available for transport of hormones and iodine is significantly decreased. And this means that basically the thyroid is forced to decrease all activity. All over the board, thyroid activity is decreased. And so iodide absorption decreases, and T3 cannot be brought into the cells. To further exacerbate the situation, because this is considered a stress, we have cortisol being produced, and this further decreases conversion of and production of T3, and it increases reverse T3. So that further worsens the problem. I would actually say that a low carbohydrate diet is worse than a low calorie diet when it comes to your thyroid health. All right. And the effects of stress are cumulative. The effects of stress are cumulative. And this means that even if a stress has ended and it happened years ago, if you did not actively go in and heal your body from that big stress, that your body is still feeling the stress. So often people will tell me, well, the stress happened 3-4 years ago and I'm feeling fine. There are still very likely hormonal imbalances that are going on as a result that could be affecting your thyroid. And this is a very, very common thing that I see. And I would say about 99% of my thyroid patients, we need to work on stress management. All right. So next, we've talked about energy, we've talked about nutrients, and we've talked about stress. And now we're going to talk about clean cells. So clean cells ultimately lead to less damage to cells as well as less cellular apoptosis, which is basically programmed cell death. So just like for our cars, we have alternative clean fuels, or we can have dirtier forms of fuel like fossil fuels. The same thing happens with your cells. So before I go on to that, as part of all cellular function, your cells are naturally going to produce toxic byproducts. But when the body is healthy, when we're eating well, exercising, sleeping well, and we have good stress management strategies, these toxic byproducts don't accumulate. So the problem really is that when we're not leading a healthy lifestyle, when there are certain things going on in our body, we don't have compounds that naturally neutralize these toxic compounds. And so they accumulate and damage our DNA, damage our cells. And then because the cell is damaged, our body wants to get rid of it. So it triggers cell death. And this happens quite a bit in the thyroid. So an example, oops, sorry about that. Let me go through this, next slide. So an example of this is iodide absorption into the thyroid. We mostly hear about iodine, but really in the foods that we eat, supplements, it's always iodide rather than iodine. And so iodide gets moved into the cell and it becomes iodine. And I've mentioned this before. This again is a process that requires energy. So the things I mentioned with sleep apnea, iron deficiency, all of those things can affect this process where iodide is being moved into iodine. And this process produces H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is normally neutralized by something called glutathione. Glutathione is your master cleaner upper. It cleans up your body. It's a very, very important molecule in your body, and with age, it tends to decrease as well. When we have adequate levels of glutathione, then hydrogen peroxide can't accumulate and it can't damage our cells. So the problem really is when we've used up our glutathione levels. And so how do we know if we've used up our glutathione levels? We know by looking at liver function. So what are some signs that our liver function is compromised and we don't have enough glutathione? All right, so your liver is such an important organ. It does so much for us. Digestion, detoxification. Your liver ultimately decides where everything that comes into your body, how it exits. So if it's, for example, a chemical in your shampoo, it gets into your body through your hair, through your scalp, and then it eventually makes its way to your liver, and your liver decides if it should be exiting through your kidneys or through your bowels in a bowel movement. And so looking at this list of things that could be stressing your liver, fatty foods, chemicals from foods, chemicals from daily hygiene products, alcohol, recreational drugs, genetics, menstrual pain that is ultimately from high estrogen levels in the body. All of these things contribute to how much your body, your liver needs to clear out of your body. So if we look at this picture, I want you to look at the left column. It says required nutrients. We have B vitamins, folic acid, another B vitamin, that's B6. And there we go, glutathione. So if you have a lot of different things that your liver needs to clear out, you're using up all your glutathione, and then you have no more glutathione to clean up the hydrogen peroxide that is naturally produced when your body moves iodide into your cells. So it's really important to address liver function when it comes to your thyroid. All right. And then, of course, if we look at this picture again, we have B vitamins. I mentioned for mitochondria energy production, we need B3 and B6. So again, if you're using up those B vitamins in liver detoxification, then you don't have any B vitamins for energy production, and your energy is going to decrease, and you won't be able to produce thyroid hormones. All right. Whew, okay, lots of information. I hope everyone's finding this useful. How can we boost glutathione levels? This is a tough one to do through food. Food doesn't really provide us with glutathione levels because we're naturally supposed to have it in our bodies. We can do supplementation, injections, increasing other master cleaner uppers in the body like vitamin C, selenium, and NAC. NAC stands for N-acetylcysteine, extra information, but NAC is the precursor to glutathione. So by increasing NAC, you indirectly also increase glutathione. Broccoli extract. People often ask me, well, can I just eat broccoli? You can, but if there's quite a bit of liver stress in your body, you need to be eating a lot of broccoli, because the form of broccoli in your capsules is quite concentrated. So it's not feasible really to be eating that much broccoli to boost your glutathione levels. All right. Oh, fasting insulin. This is something that I test quite a bit. Most naturopathic doctors do. It's not something that conventional family doctors test for, unfortunately. And so what does fasting insulin do? All right, we're in this section, we're talking about how clean cells are important for thyroid health, and high glucose, high sugar in your body can lead to damage of your cells. Insulin is a hormone that most people have heard of, it's used by diabetics, and it helps to move glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells. The problem really begins when there's insulin resistance, where your cells are no longer responding to insulin, and so they're no longer bringing in glucose into the cells, and so you have glucose overflowing in your cells and everywhere in your body. And your body responds to this in two different ways. One, your immune system comes to the rescue. And whenever we think of the immune system, I want you to associate it with inflammation. So immune system, inflammation. Immune system, inflammation. Those two things are always connected. We don't want inflammation. One, again, like I said, your body naturally produces a lot of toxic byproducts, and inflammation or immune cell activity is one of those things that causes a lot of toxic byproducts to accumulate. So we don't want inflammation. The second way that your body responds and deals with high glucose levels is that your liver and pancreas work together to store the excess glucose as fat, as adipose tissue, and to cause weight gain. And weight gain also contributes to inflammation. So because of all this inflammation, we have a big increase in toxic byproducts, which damages the cells and ultimately leads to low T3. I encourage everyone to get their fasting insulin levels tested. It's such a useful test to do. It's inexpensive, and it's often elevated years before things like fasting glucose, which is often tested, as well as something like HbA1c, which is tested in diabetics or metabolic syndrome. So fasting insulin is the first thing to be affected whenever there's an issue with how your body processes glucose. So definitely get that tested. Autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease, we have elevated antibodies. We mostly test for two different types of antibodies, thyroglobulin, thyroperoxidase, and these are either destroying the thyroid itself or enzymes that are critical to hormone production. And there are two ideas to approaching autoimmune disease. And the first one is that your immune system is overworked and is starting to make mistakes. And so it's important to address things that could be overworking your immune system. It's very common for people to have a digestive infection that they don't really know about. So if you have a lot of bloating, a lot of flatulence, those are signs that your immune system is overworked. Or if you haven't been sick for years and years and years, and people think that that's a good thing, but you really need to recycle and train your immune cells. And so it's normal to get a scratchy throat every once in a while. And as long as that scratchy throat does not last more than 3-4 days, it's actually a good thing. Your immune system needs that. So if those are some signs that your immune system is being overworked, and this could be contributing to autoimmune disease. The second thing is that your body wants to destroy the thyroid because its cells are damaged. And so we want to go in and clean up those things that could be damaging the thyroid. So it could be excess glucose, it could be the hydrogen peroxide that we talked about, it could be bread. Bread is one of those things that if there's a thyroid issue, it's just best to avoid it. And it's because there's a protein in there called gliadin. Gliadin is similar to gluten. It's a protein. And gliadin looks very, very similar to an enzyme that functions in the thyroid. So if you have an autoimmune condition where your thyroid is being attacked by the body, and you're eating bread, your body is going to make more antibodies to deal with the gliadin, and the byproduct is that it's also going to attack your thyroid even more. So bread is just something that I recommend, if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition, stay away from bread. That is a must above all else. All right, vitamin D. Whew. Just gonna check the time. Okay, we're almost done. Vitamin D levels are associated with a lot of autoimmune conditions because it plays such a big part in your immune system. And so Hashimoto's, where thyroid peroxidase is being attacked. Thyroid peroxidase is one of your enzymes in the thyroid, and it's often attacked by the immune system, and vitamin D can be low in these people. And so in Vancouver, right now it's gorgeous outside, so we're getting some vitamin D, but for all of us in the winter, our vitamin D levels can decrease quite a bit and we become quite deficient in it. So in the winter, in fall, in autumn, I recommend everyone get their vitamin D levels tested so that you can determine what dosage of vitamin D you should be taking and for how long, to make sure that you get your vitamin D levels up to what you want it to be. And this is crucial for a healthy immune system. And in vitamin D, in Vancouver, it's rare for me to see someone who is not deficient in vitamin D. All right. So, forms of thyroid medication. I wanted to talk about this because in pretty much everyone that has a thyroid issue who has been to their family doctor has been put on Synthroid. That's the main form of medication that is used. And there are other options and there are other forms. And while a lot of people respond very well to Synthroid, not everyone does. So if you're one of these people, it's worth trying some of the other forms of thyroid medication. And so that's why I did want to put this section into my presentation. So Synthroid is synthetic T4. One of the issues is that it does have fillers. Excuse me. It has cornstarch, it has lactose, and for people who are sensitive to these fillers, it can be an issue. With Synthroid, it's a set dosage. There's not much flexibility, so it's difficult to adjust and individualize dosages when it comes to this medication. And then, the biggest problem I have with just giving someone Synthroid is that we're assuming that this person doesn't have a conversion issue. And so again, conversion is taking your T4 hormone and changing that into T3. And I would say because there are so many different factors that affect conversion, liver function, nutritional deficiencies, fasting, stress, medications, lifestyle, chronic illnesses like diabetes, inflammation, genetics, heavy metal toxicity. That's a really long list of things that can affect your T4 to T3 conversion. So it's a huge assumption to assume that someone can do this conversion properly. So in someone who has an issue converting T4 to T3, if you're just giving T4, you're not really helping the issue, and you can actually make things worse because the T4, and I forgot to put this in here, but the T4, if we remember, can actually become reverse T3. And so if someone is selenium deficient or zinc deficient and they can't convert T4 into T3, but you give them all this T4 hormone, then you're just increasing reverse T3, and that's not really helping the issue. And so in people where I suspect that there's a conversion issue, either we have to make sure that we're supplementing selenium and zinc, or addressing any of these factors that affect conversion, or we can give them Cytomel, which is the synthetic form of T3. And Cytomel is rarely used on its own. It's usually used along with T4. And again, it's especially helpful for people who cannot convert T4 into T3. That ends the portion of synthetic thyroid hormones. The next part is desiccated. And desiccated is basically dried thyroid. It's usually from an animal, usually bovine, and it naturally has a combination of T4 and T3. The ERFA ones are preformed tablets, so again, there's a set dosage, so less flexibility for dosing. They do contain fillers, but they are slightly cheaper. And then we have compounded desiccated thyroid. It's much more flexible. I can say I want 100 micrograms of T4, and I want 52 micrograms of T3. And they'll make it, the pharmacist will make it this way. So it's very exact. I can tailor it exactly to what makes you feel the best. It comes with a certificate of an analysis, so we know exactly how much T4 and T3 you're getting in a pill, which does not happen with the ERFA, this one. But of course, it's more expensive. It also doesn't have fillers. But for people who are sensitive to the fillers, it is worthwhile to try the compounded desiccated thyroid. All right, almost at the end, just a few more slides. And I hope that you've learned about the thyroid in my presentation. I really want to summarize the key things that I want you to take away from my presentation. And so this next slide is, in evaluating your own thyroid health, what are some of the key questions you need to ask? You want to ask yourself, is your thyroid making the appropriate amount of hormones? So again, there's the metaphor of the jockey using his or her whip to make the horse go faster. Is that chain of command working well? Is your horse going fast? And is your jockey kind of keeping things in check? The next question is, are your hormones getting into your cells? So you can take your pulse. If it's less than 50, then your heart isn't getting enough thyroid hormone. What's your basal body temperature? So taking your temperature for 3 days in a row, 3 times a day, and seeing if your temperature is below 36 degrees. How clean is your body? Are my cells damaged? What's liver function like? I even encourage you tonight to go take a look at your shampoo bottle. And are there any synthetic chemicals in there, like coloring? Sometimes there's a yellow 400 or something like that. I would encourage trying to stay away from those products because it can be contributing to your liver health. Are you eating organic, or are you washing your fruits and vegetables well? Are your cells damaged by insulin, by glucose, I mean? And then finally, how efficient are your mitochondria? So is your energy quite low? Are you cold all the time? So these are the 4 questions that I really encourage you to answer, ask and answer about your thyroid health. And if you answer no to any of these, then you and your family doctor or your naturopath, whoever you're working with, have to look into why the answer is no. Where is the issue? All right, so why is one pill not enough? This was the question I set out to explain in this seminar, and I hope that I've been able to explain just how complex the thyroid is and how it's affected by so many different things. And really, for most people, thyroid dysfunction it's got so many contributing factors. It's multifactorial. And so in mainstream medicine, where thyroid function and health is predominantly assessed by TSH, and then only if your TSH is out of range is T3 and T4 tested, then, if your TSH is out of range and your T3 and T4 is out of range, then the next step is to give you a pill to try and put all of these numbers back into range. But that one pill doesn't really address all of the underlying issues that could be contributing to the thyroid dysfunction. And so in my approach to thyroid health, I want to make sure that we're managing symptoms. And I do often use medication for this, but that's to buy us time to address the underlying causes. So, this is just a review of what we've talked about, addressing energy production, liver function, stress management, nutritional deficiencies like minerals, zinc, selenium, iron, antioxidants like glutathione, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamins B3, B6, vitamin D. And then I just want to come back to stress. Right here. A lot of people, actually for all of us, we can't avoid stress. Stress naturally occurs. So it's not viable, it's not possible to eliminate all stress, but it's possible to affect how your body responds to the stress. And so when we say stress management or adrenal function, that's really what we're trying to do, is to improve how your body responds to stress, so that even when there is a stressful event, your hormones do not completely go out of balance. All right. So these are all the things that we look at in the naturopathic approach to thyroid health. And I hope that you see that with just one pill, with Synthroid, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to address all of these things. And you really need a more comprehensive approach. And then just a reminder, I started off with this slide. Your thyroid gland is interconnected with all of these different areas, and thyroid health does not just end inside. It's not just confined to what's happening in your thyroid gland, but it extends to your whole body. And the thyroid gland really, really amazes me, because it really affects every single cell in your body. And so that's why when there's thyroid dysfunction, symptoms can be so broad and often debilitating. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. I am so grateful that you're all here to listen to me talk. This is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, because I think that the current way of assessing thyroid function leaves a lot of people out of the loop. And it's very frustrating when you know that you experience weight gain, your energy is not what it used to be, you have hair loss, and you go to your family doctor and all your blood work comes back normal and you're told that you're fine. And so I really hope that in my presentation I've been able to shine a light on what might be the next step in addressing thyroid health. And I have my contact info here. I work out of a clinic in downtown Vancouver. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm very passionate about working with people with mental health issues, thyroid, hormonal issues, stress, and digestion, because all of those things are so very much interconnected. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a look at the questions. If I can do that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so first question, which, if any, food groups should one avoid? Any food that is very supportive to the thyroid. So as I mentioned, Brazil nuts are amazing. Having a wide variety of seeds, sunflower seed, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, all of those are great. Next question, raw cruciferous vegetables. Yes, so things like broccoli might not be the right thing for you. And this is because those things can increase goiter size. So a goiter is when your thyroid is so enlarged because it's trying to create more thyroid tissue to compensate for decreased thyroid function. So in terms of diet, everything has to be really individualized. And as I mentioned, iodine is not something for everyone. When I talked about calorie restriction and low carb or low calorie diets, iodine can be very, very helpful. And sometimes I'll increase iodine intake to a couple milligrams per day. But for a lot of people, this is detrimental to thyroid health. So please, really, I need to reinforce that before you start any supplements or anything for your thyroid health, please make sure that you consult with a healthcare provider. All right. Okay, so the next question, why do doctors only test for TSH? Because TSH is at the top of the chain of command, they believe that TSH will reflect what's going on in the rest of the body. And I didn't necessarily get into this in a lot of detail because it gets very, very complicated, but your brain, kind of like you have different thermostats in your house, and the temperature, outside your house is going to be different from the temperature inside your house. Your whole body has different sensors for thyroid, and the sensor in your brain is different from that in the rest of your body. So it's a flawed way of thinking to assume that TSH reflects your thyroid hormones in the whole body. It really only reflects thyroid levels inside your brain. I hope I was able to answer that question.
Actually, just to interrupt, I just remembered I asked that. I just remembered it's because of medical coverage. MSP doesn't cover the others. So how do you get the other ones covered? I just remembered that now.
You cannot actually get it covered. The reason being, in Canadian healthcare, if your TSH is not out of range, then even if your family doctor asks to test T3 and T4, it will automatically be canceled because your TSH is in the normal range. So this is something that even for family doctors, their hands are kind of tied. You'd have to pay out of pocket to get it tested. So unfortunately, it's still out of pocket. Okay, so is it possible to have hypothyroidism and a bit of hyperthyroidism as well? Not at the same time. Some people do switch from one to the other, and that's a separate thyroid condition where you switch from hypo to hyperthyroidism. All right. Next question, what are some good sources of iron that are not meat-based? All right. So spinach is a great source of iron. Beans are another great source of iron. I would say that with iron, the most important thing, is addressing why the iron levels are low. So for women, we menstruate every single month, and that can be a huge source of iron loss. So if you have endometriosis or heavy bleeding, then that would be something that needs to be addressed first, so that you can actually, so that whatever diet or supplement you're getting actually tops up your thyroid levels, and you're not just constantly going back to square one every month after you bleed. What is minimum hours of sleep required? Everyone is different. It's not so much about the number of hours of sleep that you get, but the quality of sleep that you get. So I always ask people, do you wake up in the middle of the night? And if you do, are you able to go back to bed? What's your energy like in the morning? All of these things. Do you dream? So I think those are better ways of assessing whether or not you're getting good sleep, and not so much the number of hours that you're sleeping. All right. Temperature of 35 or 36, I wouldn't consider that a fever necessarily. It's a low temperature for a fever, but if your natural temperatures are like 34 degrees, and 36 degrees would be a fever for you specifically. If your feet are cold but your hands aren't, it's tough to say what that's due to. It could be a combination of hypothyroidism and cardiovascular issues. I'd have to really ask more questions to determine that. All right. If you were in Weight Watchers years ago, then your thyroid can be healed, but it takes a lot longer. And basically, with the low carbohydrate or calorie diets, going back to the metaphor of the jockey and the horse, your jockey basically has fallen asleep, and your thyroid, your horse, is going very slow, but your horse doesn't know that, isn't aware of that. So when we see blood work, there's a huge disconnect. Often TSH is in the normal range, and T4 is low and T3 is low. Low carb diet, I'm talking about all carbs, so both complex and simple carbs. So even keto, I wouldn't recommend doing that for too long, because that is a low carb diet. Is there a way to stop taking Synthroid? Yes, there is a way to stop taking Synthroid. It depends on what thyroid issues you're dealing with. For example, if you've had an autoimmune condition for quite a while, it's more difficult to go off of Synthroid. If it is possible to go off of Synthroid, then really we need to have addressed all of those things that we talked about that could be contributing to thyroid dysfunction. So we need to be looking at liver function, reproductive health, the whole endocrine system. All right. I'm just reading through the next question. I see a question about red blood cell width. That's a difficult question for me to answer. I'd have to see the rest of your blood work. Okay, so is it possible to no longer require taking prescription T3 and T4 by addressing the root cause? Yes, I answered that. So if all of those underlying causes have been addressed, and your thyroid has not been destroyed by any autoimmune process, then yes, you can go off of it. Raw or cooked broccoli? Raw is better. But really, you'd have to be eating so much raw broccoli that it's not really a viable option. The broccoli extract would be much better. So what moves glucose out of cells? We don't really have anything that moves glucose out of cells. If you have glucose overflowing out of your cells, then if you eliminate or decrease carbs from your diet, then eventually your body will get to using the glucose inside your cells. How do we test fasting insulin? It's just a simple test at Life Labs. I've never seen it on Life Labs forms from medical doctors, so I don't know if they actually test it at all. Is there a reasonable recommendation of tests we can get through the GP before seeing a naturopath? Yes, so I would say ferritin levels, vitamin D, sometimes family doctors will test. Getting a complete blood count, CBC, so that's looking at your all your red blood cells and white blood cells. That's important as well. Those things, and then liver function tests, cholesterol levels. So in hypothyroidism, all metabolism is slowed down, and that includes your liver's processing of cholesterol. So cholesterol levels are often a clue that you're hypothyroid. Is hypothyroidism an autoimmune disease? It can be, not all the time. And yes, Hashimoto's would be the autoimmune one. Sourdough bread, I would still avoid. It still has the gliadin. It's just sourdough for a lot of people is easier to digest. Next question, once the thyroid gland has been destroyed by the immune system, can it heal and start functioning normally again if the immune system is put in check? It really depends on how far the immune process has gone. So really tough to say. Gluten-free bread. Gluten-free bread, I believe they've only taken out the gluten protein and not the gliadin protein. So gluten-free bread would still best to avoid it. Is it okay to take vitamin D daily year-round if not getting enough sun? Yes, it's okay, but of course get your levels tested. And throughout the year, along with changes in sun exposure, you want to change the amount of vitamin D that you're taking. So if you're taking a higher dose, it should only be a short time period. Okay, how do we increase iron levels? Do supplements work? Yes, supplements work, but you need to make sure that things like stomach acid, which are required for iron absorption, are adequate. So we need to address why the iron is low, along with topping it up with supplements. Is it worth it to take a glutathione supplement? So someone was told that it doesn't work unless it's IV therapy, and that can get quite expensive. Certain glutathione supplements are good, but not always. So there's liposomal glutathione, and basically that liposomal glutathione is in a form of glutathione that is automatically absorbed, and it can just kind of slip through into a cell. So in those forms are worthwhile. With glutathione, it's not something that you have to be taking permanently. You're really just topping up levels, because if you're getting enough vitamin C and things like that, you're ultimately recycling your glutathione. if you're no longer menstruating, but your iron levels are still low, then I would look at stomach acid levels. Okay, so there's a question about where I want the range to be for TSH, and I'll comment on the TSH and T3 and T4. So usually I don't remember the exact ranges, but for example, T4, I believe the range is, I think, 10.6 to about 19, I believe. And so really optimal, we want you to be in the top half range. So I would say at least 15 would be best. TSH, ideally, we want below 2, but not too low. If your TSH is too low, then that means your thyroid activity is actually suppressed. Okay. So I've talked about cruciferous vegetables. Again, diet things like definitely very, very individualized. How to increase stomach acid levels. So often stomach acid levels are low because of proton pump inhibitors. So people who have heartburn, they're often prescribed PPIs, which then shut down stomach acid levels. So to increase stomach acid levels, you want to be giving enough attention to your whole digestive process. So from the moment you think about food, you start cooking, your body is already preparing for digestion, and you need enough time for your body to actually produce stomach acid. So I would say making sure that you're chewing your food properly, you're not rushing, that you take time to cook and connect with your food. That's all very important. Okay. Okay, what is a safe sleep supplement? Sleep is something that I could do a whole nother talk on. Some of my favorites would be a tea, like chamomile, lavender, passion flower, all of those things are good. They're safe to take, so that's why I would recommend. I know Choices has, what's the brand? A Vogel passion flower or Pasco passion flower supplements, and those are great. Are naturopath supplements covered by MSP? Unfortunately, they are not. There are some work insurance plans that cover supplements, but I don't see it often. Should a person see both their family GP as well as a naturopath? Yes, and I think that one of the big things is that patients are hiding the care that they're getting from naturopaths. And really, I write letters to families' GPs to encourage communication and conversation. And so I definitely encourage people to see both a GP and a naturopath. You don't need to choose one or the other. Really, the two can complement each other. So as I mentioned in the presentation, I do prescribe T3 and T4 medications, and so and it can be helpful to get additional testing from family doctors. And so really, please don't choose between one or the other. Do both. All right. All right. So I think someone's asking about going to the washroom in the middle of the night because you're drinking tea before going to bed. So the chamomile teas, I would drink it about an hour before going to bed, especially if you have a tendency to wake up. All right. those, I think, are all the questions. I'm going to unpin myself. One sec. Oops. Perfect. Okay. One moment. All right. Sorry. Any other last minute questions? I hope that everyone found that useful and learned something about the thyroid. I would love to do a sleep seminar. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'd love to answer them as much as possible. If they're case specific, then I encourage you to book in with me so that we can go into things in more detail. My email, someone's asking me, my email is olisa@inspirithealth.ca. So I'll say that again, it's olisa@inspirit, INSPIRIT, health.ca. Thank you, and everyone, I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Mack.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.